Welcome to First and Future Live, a program from the Institute for Emerging Issues at NC State University. I'm Leslie Boney, the director of the Institute for Emerging Issues, and we are really glad to have you with us here today. This is a program that we put on every other week where we talk about the people and places that are shaping our state's future. Every other week, we look at key issues facing the state, and we talk with the people who are helping us to figure them out. Today's topic broadly is higher education. More narrowly, it is the historically Black colleges and universities in our state, and more narrowly than that, the challenges and opportunities facing private historically Black colleges and universities in North Carolina. It's the second part of a four-part series that we have looking at historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs. Last time we focused on the largest HBCU in the country, our public land grant, NC State University. Coming up on April 27th, we'll look at Elizabeth City State University. And on May 11th, we'll be talking with North Carolina Central University. We're going to be looking in all these cases at how these institutions were founded, the issues that they're facing right now during time of COVID, and where they're going in the future. North Carolina is blessed with more HBCUs than any other state in the country, and more HBCU students than any other place in the country. And you can see a depiction of where those colleges are now, starting down in Charlotte with Johnson C. Smith, going up I-85, Livingstone College, a cluster of campuses in the Triad area, another cluster in the Triangle area, Fayetteville State down in Cumberland County, and then out on the northeast corner of North Carolina, Elizabeth City State University. So these are the Big Ten, the HBCUs that have been playing for, in many cases, well over 100 years, a critical role in our future. And we're joined today by the presidents of two of those colleges and universities. First, Suzanne Walsh, the president of Bennett College, and Dr. Paulette Dillard, who's the president of Shaw University. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, and thank you.
And thanks to everybody else for joining us as well. If you're watching this program on Facebook Live or YouTube, we ask that you tell your friends, whether they be Bennett College alums or Shaw University alums or fans of HBCUs or others who are interested in higher education in North Carolina. Please tell them about the program, get them to tune in and ask their questions. If you're watching this on audio tape or videotape later, please email us any questions or comments that you'd have. We'd love to hear from you. Let me start off with a question for both of you, though. And this is the question I think that any college president anywhere in the country is asking right now is, what's happening to us? How are we doing this education thing on the back end of this pandemic? Maybe Dr. Dillard, could you start off? What does Shaw University look like right now, and how is that different from what it might look like maybe 2 years ago?
Shaw University has students on campus, so we have a hybrid model going on where students have some in-person classes. Those that don't feel comfortable being on campus are taking classes remotely. But many of the activities that characterize the spring semester at any university are extremely modified or curtailed. So it resembles a college 2 years ago without all of the activity and the comings and the goings that you have on a college campus. So we are grateful that we have been relatively successful in allowing about 30% of our campus is back in person, and we've been able to do it relatively safely, and are so excited that we're looking forward to a modified in-person graduation, which seems to have made students and parents so happy, in the midst of all things COVID. But we're more of a clinic college than anything else. We're doing COVID testing weekly. We now have a vaccination clinic going. So it looks more like, instead of spring football and those kind of things. It's all the activity in the gym is around COVID. So it's a real different experience here at Shaw. But nevertheless, we are excited that we have been able to have the semester that we've had.
President Walsh, you're all virtual right now. And I know one of the commitments that Bennett College has is that it wants to be able to guarantee its students that it is a safe campus. And a couple of years ago, you were ranked as the second safest campus in North Carolina. But going all virtual has to give the place a completely different feel, right?
Well, it does, although, I really like to think about being virtual as what the future looks like for Bennett. It's not what it looked like last year. Well, I guess not obviously right in March. It looked exactly like this, but previous to that, it didn't look this way. But I think this is really going to be part of our future moving forward. We've really taken our time to work with our faculty and our staff to help support them in terms of changing their pedagogy, adjusting to a virtual environment. And then I'm paying attention to our fresh women in particular and our sophomores and actually our juniors and seniors who figured out how to navigate this space and what does it look like to have community online. The beginning was rough. It was really difficult. We're a place that specializes, just like Shaw, like many HBCUs, and that campus experience. So part of what I had to start asking is, are we still Bennett if we're not on campus? Can you still be a Bennett Belle if you've never set foot on campus? Turns out yes. Because being a Bennett Belle is as much a mindset as it is about being on campus. So it's different on campus because it's quiet. But in terms of that Bennett experience, I think what we've learned about ourselves is that we can make it work. Moving forward, I think what we'll do is really always continue to have these options because they work really, really well for some students, faculty, and staff. And for others, it doesn't work as well. But with the vaccination coming, we can start to open in just the ways that Dr. Dillard just talked about.
One of the things that you've done intentionally, I think, over the past few years is to execute a series of memoranda of understanding with other campuses. And on some level, the thinking about how you can play bigger by being virtual also extends to those kinds of relationships with Winston-Salem State and Pfeiffer University and other places. Enable your students to have maybe some of that, the opportunities that might come at a larger university while still being able to maintain the integrity of a smaller campus. And I'm wondering, maybe virtual makes that even more possible than it has been in the past.
We chose to really, really focus on a partnership that we have via UNCF. And that partnership is with a company called Sophia Learning. We sort of put all of our efforts into having our students to work with Sophia Learning. They offered classes this past summer free to our students. We're using them for some of our general education courses now, but we tried to really focus based on the input from faculty about what would be the right partnership given this environment. To your point, now we need to go back and revisit all of our other partnerships. We have a great partnership right around us with all of the surrounding institutions. And so we need to see what else we can do moving forward. But we chose to be kind of narrow in that partnership during this time because what I wanted to do was reduce uncertainty, reduce ambiguity, and that seemed to work very, very well for our students. They really did a beautiful job, and our faculty who supported them as they took classes via Sophia Learning, it worked really well. The last quick thing that I'll say is I'm very cautious not to say that we are online. We're virtual. There's difference. And for us, what that means is how do we, again, keep that Bennett spirit? How do we keep what makes us special in our classes virtually? And so that does mean a different structure for the academic semester. We have we call them mini-mesters. So we have a 2-week session, a 7-week session, a 7-week session. We made that change this year. And so what we're doing is we're actually offering students a different experience. And I think that's really important because I know, having come from my previous work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where we were always looking for, what company could we all use for digital learning and for online learning. Yes, that's part of what we look at, but I think it has to be a complement to whatever makes our institution special. How do we deliver virtually? You can use Zoom, you can use StreamYard. How do you do that so that you keep what's unique about HBCUs? So you keep what's unique about that family sort of sense. So I'm very cautious about saying we're not online, but we are virtual.
Dr. Dillard, could you just tell me a little bit about how Shaw is keeping up the Shaw spirit? What are the intentional steps you're taking that enable people to feel like they're having something close to the traditional experience that you've offered?
As Dr. Walsh mentioned, we're doing a lot of things virtually that are student programmed, and student led, so that there is the feeling of being a part of it, because we do have a number of our student leaders that are on campus. And so they've been a great connector virtually to the broader campus. And so we're excited about that. And one of the things that Shaw benefits greatly from is being a part of the cooperating Raleigh colleges. And that allows us to bring together, Wake Tech, NC State, Meredith, William Peace, and the two HBCUs here in Raleigh, St. Augustine's and Shaw. And this cooperative allows us to cross-register on each other's campuses, and be able to virtually, have a great deal of interaction and learn from each other. And so being a part of the CRC has been a tremendous benefit. It was prior to COVID and has been proven to be even more critical during COVID, that we've been able to learn together, do some things that keeps, the universities connected, and figuring out solutions for resource sharing and that kind of thing, but still allows the student to be connected to their individual campuses. So we've learned a lot. We've gotten really good at projecting Shaw U in the digital space. And as Dr. Walsh indicated earlier, it's something that we know that will be around into the future. But we're taking advantage of all of these opportunities to connect digitally that we never thought to do when the pandemic was not front and center.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a similar exchange that was in place at the college I went to in New England, and one of the challenges was that in order to attend the classes at the other institutions, you had to get on a bus and drive for 45 minutes to go across a mountain to attend classes. And now those barriers are out the window. You don't have to worry about parking. You can access those opportunities a little bit easier.
Absolutely. And the fact that in Raleigh, we're all on the same bus line, and in some instances, depending on how physically fit you are, you could actually, walk over to NC State or St. Augustine's. So, so the cooperating Raleigh colleges is a model that, has worked extremely well in our city, and I think is worth looking at. Now, one of the things prior to the pandemic, we didn't allow you to cross-register for online classes. They were restricted to the individual campuses. And one of the adjustments we made during the pandemic as a board was that, hey, now's the time to address that. And so now, we do it, digitally as well. So it's been an exciting year.
Let me just go back in history a little bit. 156 years, I guess. Shaw is founded right at the end of the Civil War, incidentally by a guy who went to my alma mater, Amherst College.
Wow.
That's exciting. But it, for a while, was the only HBCU in the South. It was the first HBCU to admit women. For a long time, the medical school just played a critical role in raising up healthcare leaders in the field. And over time, it came to play a critical role in the civil rights movement. And I'm thinking specifically about the being the birthplace of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Can you talk a little bit about the role that civil rights has played in the history of Shaw, and maybe what role it plays in the current life at Shaw?
Leslie, you just know how to push the buttons that I love to talk about, the most. Civil rights is in the DNA of Shaw University, and even back to Henry Martin Tupper, even though he was a white Union chaplain that came south, he had such a missionary bent in terms of his strong sense of what was right as it related to humanity. And so since its inception, it has always been about meeting a need that existed in the space and time at that moment, when African Americans were basically free without any foundation or any ownership or property of any kind. His thought was that if you could learn to read, and interpret the Bible, that would give you a foundation to get started, and then to build things. And he had this, crazy idea that you should educate the family, not just the breadwinner, but the whole family, give you a better shot at having access to a successful lifestyle. So since the beginning, it's been all about what is the immediate need for the whole individual, for the opportunity to move forward successfully. So, when there was the need to educate women, Shaw was right there. Then when access to healthcare was a significant problem, he founded a medical school. Now, this was in an environment where you had to go north and very underhandedly get the support you needed to be able to move people forward. And so Shaw has been doing that. And so no surprise that with the law school, the pharmacy school, the medical school, then along comes the Fletcher report, that goes out of the window. And then it was, okay, we still have the liberal arts bent. We still have the ability to do for people what needs to be done. But the foundation of it all, Leslie, is a sound education and an ethical bent. If you have those two things, and that continues to be the core mission of Shaw University, a strong education and a strong ethical base makes you a good citizen and capable of being leaders. And so Ella Baker came out of that bent, and she came back from New York to her alma mater to say, we got to organize and do something about, what's going on in segregation. And David Forbes and the leaders that have come out of this institution, I'm amazed sometimes. It may sound really shocking to folks, but as I read the obituaries of Shaw graduates across the state of North Carolina, it is amazing the space they occupy in judges, education from superintendents to first grade teachers. 3 years ago, we honored 3 women who graduated from Shaw with degrees in chemistry to go on to be, honorary educators here in the state of North Carolina. So I'm telling a long story, but we have most recently launched the Center for Racial and Social Justice to build on that legacy in 2020 and beyond, because we know now that that conversation needs to be broadened, and that we believe that if we put forward this whole idea of a strong education, an ethical foundation, that is the formula to produce leaders that transform the world that we live in. And we believe that that's our space.
And there's a slightly longer summary of what you're talking about in the recent documentary Shaw Rising that I would recommend to everybody. We'll put some information about where you can find that in the chat. But really critical role that Shaw has played, and so has Bennett. We were talking a couple of weeks ago with Chancellor Martin about the A&T4, the folks who are credited largely with integrating the lunch counters and other spaces in Greensboro, but maybe a less told story is the Bennett Bells that were part of that. President Walsh, can you just say a little bit about the role that the Bennett Bells played in desegregating Greensboro?
Oh my God, again, Dr. Dillard, right? You just know all the right topics. So one of my favorites, although now that I hear you ask that question, it makes me think I'm going to need to get the number of like how many Bennett Bells were involved. So I'm going to have a number. But one of the great things I think about that whole movement was the beginnings of it were planned at Bennett College. They were on the Bennett College campus having meetings, organizing. And one of the things that I think about when people ask me, sort of like, tell us about Bennett Bells, I really talk a lot about we are leaders behind the scenes. And so while I may not name a person and you all say, oh yeah, I know exactly who that is. If I tell you about the work that was done to lead to that person or who's working with that person or behind, that's usually a Bennett Bell. And I think that's really indicative of our history. We were, at that time, 40% of our students during the sit-ins were arrested, 40%. Dr. Willa Player, I think, is so interesting. If you want to read a great book, we have, there's a book called Bells of Liberty, which was by Dr. Linda Brown, and it talks about that era. And what I find really interesting about that time is that Dr. Player told the students to stay in jail and not take bail, because they hadn't done anything wrong. I mean, I'm trying to think like, oh my gosh, do I have the guts to do that? And she also would make sure that and faculty would as well, make sure that students were getting their homework. Homework was delivered to the jails. And there's also a rumor that I haven't been able to substantiate that may have been some of the highest GPAs we've seen at Bennett, because our students are scholars at the same time that they're social activists. And they take both of those worlds very seriously. Really contributing back to the world is what our alums want to do. So while we see so much from that era of our students behind the scenes doing that organizing on campus, getting ready for those sit-ins and then continuing them, we also see today how that plays out. So again, we look at, I'm right in the midst of reading the latest issue of our alumni magazine called The Bell Ringer, and I'm looking at all of these women who are leading in ways that, again, it may not be the name that you know, but you know what the Pentagon is. And so when I say that we have alums who are in very high positions at the Pentagon, or when I talk about our teachers, students who were educated as teachers at Bennett College, who are now principals, who are now leading in the state of North Carolina, all of those things to me are really exciting. But I want to always make sure that people know there are different flavors of leaders. And I think that Bennett does a beautiful job of saying, if you want to lead out in front, we are going to prepare you for that. And if you want to lead behind the scenes because you really enjoy that deep and actually much harder work most of the time of the organizing, we're here to help you do that. That's part of what a liberal arts education, I think, is so fantastic at preparing students for the future.
I want to show people just a slide giving a little bit of the history of Bennett College, and you've touched on some of it, but obviously founded just a few years after Shaw, 1873, with money contributed by formerly enslaved people in Greensboro. It was the place where the first Black female president of a U.S. four-year college came. It's one of two HBCUs that are all women in the U.S. We talked about your reciprocal MOUs, and some of your alums, as you mentioned, some are in front of the scenes and others are behind the scenes. Andrea Harris, founder of the Institute for Minority Economic Development and a lot of other places, a former board member of the Institute for Emerging Issues, who just passed last year. But also, names that maybe people outside of Greensboro haven't heard of. Yvonne Johnson, the first African-American mayor of Greensboro. Belinda Foster, the first African-American DA in North Carolina. Just a lot of people who, you might not know immediately, although if you talk to them for 5 minutes, they would probably tell you they were Bennett Bells. Let me just ask you, though, there's a big challenge for U.S. colleges and universities right now, and that is trying to talk about what you are. And one temptation is to say, hey, anybody who wants to come, we would love to have you. And so that there's sort of the broadcast approach, and then there's the narrowcast approach. And I would say Bennett is taking that to a pretty extreme level. You're saying we are small, we are intentionally small, we are female, we are intentionally female, we're an HBCU, we're intentionally HBCU. We are a school with deep religious convictions. We don't hide our religious affiliation. And somehow or another, you're saying, okay, that's the direction we're going to go. We're going to make a very specific argument to a very specific group of people. Who are the people that are responding to that argument? And what is it they hear?
Oh my gosh, it's really surprising, quite frankly, because I think it resonates. I think our messaging actually resonates with a number of people. And I think especially at this moment in time, if you think about high school students, so we primarily are an institution where students come directly from high school. Some take time off, but we're mostly a pretty traditional age campus. And so when I think about what students have been through for the past 18 months or so in high schools around the country, and I think about how do you re-enter formal education, as it were? What does that look like? Are you ready to go from being at home or in an apartment or maybe in a shelter, wherever you've been? Are you ready to go from that to a big campus? Are you ready for all of that socialization that takes place? Not everybody's ready for that. Look, even without the pandemic, not everybody's ready for that. That's not everyone's preference. And I think what we're saying is there's a true ecosystem of higher education means we have lots of options. And so for some students, a very large experience is great. And for others, they say, I really want that single gender experience at a historically Black college. We're historically Black, not exclusively Black. I like to say to people, we all at HBCUs, I think, are much more diverse than people realize. We lean into our Blackness, we lean into our historically Black heritage, but at the same time, we have students who are Hispanic, we've had students who are Asian, we've had white students. But if you're looking for a small, intimate experience, if you're looking for an experience that does have with it a focus on spirituality, we have Muslim students on campus. So even though, yes, we do lean into our Christian heritage as a United Methodist affiliated institution, at the same time, we say what matters is spirituality. So for a student to have a holistic student experience, which we can offer in a very small place, we think about that in terms of physical health, mental health, obviously your academic health, financial health. We think about in terms of spiritual health. And so that really is part of what we're leaning into. And I think that holistic sense of the student is also something that is really appealing to a number of people who may not have had Bennett on their radar before. But we wanted to think through, for the students for whom we're most successful, what has that experience looked like, and what could it look like if we did more of what works well and less of what hasn't worked so well. So it's been really, I think, very exciting and surprising, quite frankly, about how many people are really understanding it and embracing that idea.
Let me ask both of you about women. And over the past 50 years, there's been a real reversal in U.S. colleges and universities from overall maybe 60% male, 40% female to what's generally about 60% female, 40% male. And if wanted to just show you a couple of slides and then we can talk about them. First is looking at the percentage of women who enroll in college, higher than the percentage of men who enroll in college during 18 to 24 years. Completion, women completed a higher rate over 6 years than men do. And when you get to attainment, this is a breakout for African American men and women specifically. That ends up with about 40% of African American women with a 2 to 4 year degree, 30% of African American males. And then you take a look at what's happened during COVID and you find that gap is growing even larger. Again, this is just a breakout for African American males and females. The declines during COVID for African American males higher than African American females and higher than any group except for Native Americans. So the number of African American males enrolled in 2 and 4 year universities in spring 2021 down 10% from a year ago. And I'm wondering, some people call this the disappearing male, others point specifically to the disappearing African American male when it comes to higher ed. Why is it, do you think, that college is becoming a more attractive place for women and on some level a less attractive place for men? What's going on there?
Well, we started out as a co-ed institution. So on your slide, one missing fact is in 1873 we were co-ed, and it wasn't until 1926 that we became a women's institution. Because we don't have men. I'm not sure I can fully answer that question, but I do think that what we're seeing in terms of a lot of the social movements right now is we are seeing women continue to lead. Women continuing to be activists and looking for spaces where they can fully engage. I'm on the board of the Women's College Coalition. And, our enrollment is actually flat from last year to this year. We're very close to being flat. And so there is something about this moment in time that I think is speaking to women in education, speaking to Black women in education in particular. But I don't know, as of 1926, that I can talk about what is happening with men, because they have in fact disappeared from Bennett. But my colleague is the expert.
Yeah, actually, we were pleasantly surprised that in the 2019-2020 school year, we had, for the first time in about 5 years, an equal number of men and women in our entering freshman class in 2019. And what we have experienced here at Shaw, which I'm sure is similar on other campuses as well, it's almost a war on the Black male. And, so the emotional, physical, identity kind of issues that affect African-American men, I don't think we have necessarily been as attuned to as we've been in our students in general. And so in the last 3 to 5 years, we have began to focus on, our retention rates, graduation rates. All of those numbers could change tremendously if we address them in the male population. And so we have undertaken to understand a little bit better, what is happening in, the male population. We know that there's this sense of belonging associated with having sports. And we noticed that, although, it's contrary to everything everybody wants to think about when you think about how sports matter on a college campus. For African-American males, that is an incredible draw, because if you don't draw them in, you don't have a chance to work with them to get them out. And we find that, using the mechanisms of interest in order to address and understand better the needs of African American males is something that, is very important to us, and something that we are working to, and research is a tough word when you're talking about human beings, but we're trying to really get to the core of, what is impacting, the American male. And if you think about, the impact of slavery, Jim Crow, and what is happening in the current social environment that's directed specifically, at the Black male, then that is a space that HBCUs have an opportunity in, among many others, that we're working to try to keep that 50% balance. And now we're turning our attention to how do we retain them and graduate them? Where is it that the issue comes when, college no longer appeals to them? And what we've learned so far, Leslie, is that, when you don't have a strong foundation coming out of elementary and high school, it is very difficult for African American males to admit that and to allow you to, help them close the gap so that they can be successful. And so we're looking to find ways to identify that and be able to help them have that confidence that they can do it. And I point to our history. We've done it, in the past. There is absolutely no reason we can't do it in the future. And we are committed that, the male population on our campus, and especially, the male population on our campus needs the attention that Shaw can give. And one of the programs that we had hoped to launch last summer, but the COVID pandemic inhibited us. And that was, we're working on a way to encourage Black men to get into the classroom early. Because if we can have Black male teachers in elementary education classrooms, we believe that it will make a substantial difference in attainment, because as you know, it is fact that, if you see a teacher that looks like you, within grades 1, 2, 3, the outcomes are significantly, better for African Americans. And so one of the ways that we hope to get in front of this issue is attracting, training, and getting more Black men in elementary education classrooms.
Some really insightful comments in the thread from a woman named Kelly Thalamock, who's talking about some of the issues that African American males may be facing, talking about job losses. In some cases, families are down in income and people feeling the increased pressure to make that money available to their parents, and nervous about going to college. And she goes on to say that men, no matter what position they're in, males of color are sometimes not celebrated for their different skills. They may be celebrated in sports or music, but not so much in corporate or scientific fields. I know there's some funding in President Biden's budget that would increase fairly substantially the efforts to recruit more people of color into the STEM fields. And I'm wondering what impact you think that could have for your women, President Walsh, or for your men and women, Dr. Dillard?
Well, we've been working on trying to increase the number of people of color in STEM, for a number of years. and we continue to encourage that. What we don't seem to get, Leslie, and I want to make this point, clear. We know how to train them, but the scaffolding that goes around bringing them up to where they need to be and then take them forward is a tough lift on the same dime that would take a student who is already, very well prepared to make that lift. And that is extremely important in STEM. And so our institutions need a lot more support to provide the scaffolding, because they have the ability, they have the potential. We've demonstrated it over and over. And we celebrate them in those roles. Where we have the tough lift is having the resources that we need, to bring them from where they are to where they need to be. And if we can do that, if we have the resources to do that, the rest of the lift becomes easy. And that is the space. And if you look at the statistics, we graduate more. We do, because we do that heavy lifting, at the foundational level. So let us have them, but give us the resources, that are needed, because you can't take the same tuition dollar and lift up an under-resourced group the same way you do with someone who comes from a different resource background. And so we believe that that it's the right movement is to provide the additional funding that is needed so that we can do that foundational work. And we've shown over and over again, students that graduate from HBCUs can go on to any, a graduate school, professional school, and do well. They just have to have that right foundation and support that says, we know you can do it. We've been doing it, for since the beginning of time. But give us the resources that we're looking forward to coming out of the Biden support for us to finally do those kinds of things. And we are committed in North Carolina, to the My Future NC attainment goals specifically for, African American and other people of color, and all of our students to be able to fill that pipeline. We just need the resources to do it.
President Walsh, Bennett has struggled, as a number of places have, with resources, the resource question, and has done an exceptional job over the past few years of reaching out to alums. But you also have a history of working in the philanthropic community. You and Dr. Dillard are both keenly aware of what's going on in Washington on the budget question. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about what role institutions that you've worked for, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Lumina Foundation and the Heinz Endowment, what role they can play in helping to make college more affordable, or helping with some of these resource questions that Dr. Dillard teed up?
Well, I think, as Dr. Dillard and I think all of us who are, especially in the independent and private HBCU space, are watching very carefully. We're watching very carefully the opportunities for investment into infrastructure. And so I want to go back to that STEM piece that Dr. Dillard was talking about, because the infrastructure support that we are hoping for and anticipating in coming out of that skinny budget, I think is critical for all of the reasons that Dr. Dillard said. We're not only are our students starting behind, our institutions are starting behind. There's an OMB report that shows that about 46% of HBCUs are in need of repairs and refurbishing of our labs. But even with that, we're still graduating all of these folks. We're still excelling in terms of the students who who are graduating from our programs, going on to graduate school. So when you think about and look at what we've done with what we have, imagine what's possible if we're actually on even footing. So really exciting. So I say that as the preamble because I think that what's happening in Washington is very exciting and very promising. And at the same time, I think that right now what I'm seeing in the philanthropic community, and I still sit on the board of a foundation in Texas, Trellis Foundation, when I look at what's happening in the philanthropic community, I see that at the moment, philanthropy is still trying to see where are the opportunities to have real impact, to have the greatest impact. And a number of foundations are actually starting to shift from where they once were. So they really, at one point in time, philanthropy had not been thinking about investing in infrastructure or investing in what we might call capacity building in that field, and really taking a look to see what are those things that, in addition to supporting projects and programs like the things you would typically see foundations support, what are the things that are more at the core? Because those core things are what will allow us to be even more successful than we are at the moment. And so I'm looking at that change. There is a huge focus across all of those foundations that you just named that I worked for, that all of them have put equity at the forefront. Now what they're saying is, and what does that mean? And they're working, I think each of those foundations is working really beautifully to figure out what is that right match. Because it's not just about project support. As I said, they're really looking at investing in the capacity of our institutions in particular, but I would say also organizations that are led by people of color. How do we support that capacity building so that we are at that even playing field? You're on me. Okay.
Okay. Dawn Booker in the chat makes a comment that one shift that might be useful is from seeing investment in HBCUs as something that you can save on by not doing, to instead seeing it as an investment. And I wanted to just show a quick slide that is based on a UNC, a United Negro College Fund study of North Carolina HBCUs from a couple of years ago. And it looks at the total economic impact of HBCUs. So if you look at just the HBCUs in North Carolina, annual economic impact, and this is from maybe 5 years ago, was estimated to be $1.7 billion a year. And the total number of jobs, both direct jobs and indirect jobs that come out of that, a little over 15,000. And the lifetime earnings of each year's graduates of HBCUs, a little over $21 billion. And just to put that in some kind of perspective, that if you look at the expected earnings of someone who went to an HBCU versus somebody who didn't go on in higher education over the course of their lifetime, on average, that's about $1 million extra that they will get with that degree. So this total impact of HBCUs really pays off, both in terms of tax dollars that folks are going to pay over the course of their lifetime, but also the impact they're able to have on their communities. And I think in a lot of cases, people look at the sticker shock of things like increasing Pell Grants or increasing investments in infrastructure in our colleges and universities, or setting up special programs to encourage more people to be in the STEM fields. And they see those as costs, and they are in the short term, but in the long term, I think Dawn's point is really that this is an investment. And I'm wondering how both of you are making that argument better than I just did, or differently, in a way that seems to be resonating with the folks you're talking to.
I'm going to speak because, Leslie, as I said earlier, I'm going to have to run to another meeting. But I would like to, close by just focusing on my future NC. That in order for the state of North Carolina to fill the job pipeline for the growing economy in our state, we need 2 million adults ages 25 to 44 with post-secondary degrees or credentials in the year 2030. And at the current trajectory, we're going to be 400,000 short, you know, in that sector. And if you think about the growth of the population of people of color, there is absolutely no way you're going to get to that attainment goal without having, you know, the full population educated and able to contribute. And so if you think about the value of education in meeting the economic growth for the region, I don't know why you would have to make a case that it's not a good investment to have, you know, have students trained and able to do that. It just, you know, as an educator, I don't get why that is just not readily, you know, evident that the job growth is not in those areas that you can do without some kind of quality post-secondary education and training. The Triangle, for instance, fastest growing life sciences hub in the nation. You know, and so if you look at where this region is going and its growth, you know, you have to have an educated population for that to continue going. Then look at the statistics from the report you just quoted from the UNCF punching above their weight. We graduate, we enroll 46% of Black students. We graduate, you know, 45%. You know, the largest number of engineers in the nation are produced by North Carolina A&T. You know, and so, you know, you just go down and check off the list. It is an education, post-secondary education, or credential, and usually those credentials come with being educated or trained. I don't understand how you get from one side of the equation to the other without education being that equals, you know, a trained workforce, equals, you know, sustained growth, equals a contributing society versus a mass that you have to take care of on the other side because they can't contribute in the growing economy. So I close again, thanking you, Leslie, for the opportunity to be on this podcast this morning. And I yield to my able-bodied colleague to continue the conversation.
All right, thank you, Dr. Dillard. Dr. Paulette Dillard is the president of Shaw University, and we have a few more minutes with President Walsh, but thank you to President Dillard for joining us. Let me just ask you the same question. That was sort of a mic drop answer, but I'm wondering if you could talk about what argument you're making to parents maybe who are nervous about investing the kind of money that a college education requires, and to outside investors that are wondering whether college is worth it. What do you say, and what seems to resonate with people that you feel like they're hearing during this time?
Well, I think so. Dawn Booker works at Bennett College, and you know, she's very much right about the shift from save to invest in. I think that's really been something that has resonated with investors because if you think about Bennett as a place to just be saved, that doesn't necessarily resonate with all the economic arguments, the kinds of things that Dr. Dillard was just talking about. And I've really wanted to shift the conversation in Greensboro, in the Triad, to say Bennett College is a contributor back. We're not just a place to be saved and preserved in sort of almost museum-like language, but we're actually an active contributor now to the economy in our region, and we want to continue to be an active contributor moving forward. So that's sort of on the investor side. I think for parents, one of the things that I don't think gets enough really sort of play is that a liberal arts education prepares you for a very long arc in terms of your career. So as I was saying, I was looking at our latest edition of our alumni magazine, and when I look at what our alums are doing, yes, she may have she may have majored in English, but now she's working at the Pentagon, or, you know, she may have majored in history, but now she's, you know, working behind the scenes at CNN, or whatever the storyline may be. What happens is a liberal arts education actually allows you to be able to adjust for fluctuations in the economy. You're not just prepared for one thing. You're actually prepared to say, when the unexpected arrives, when there are new opportunities in the economy, do I know how to adjust? Do I have those critical thinking skills? Do I have communication skills, writing, and so forth? And Google did a report, I think it's probably about, I think it's maybe like a 5-year-old report, so probably around the same time as that particular study you were referencing, and they looked at the people who were in leadership roles at Google over time. Those people primarily came from liberal arts backgrounds, not from the tech sector. The other thing that we keep looking at is it's also the intersection between STEM and the arts. That's really where kind of the future creative world will come from. When you know how to both, you know, sort of operate within the STEM fields, which a lot of us, you know, are very excited about, and biology is one of our top majors. But if you know how to operate within the STEM field and you understand the intersection with the liberal arts, we will not see some of the other issues that Google is having at the moment. So we think that we can really help to produce ethical and well-informed, adaptable skill sets for students over a lifetime. And so I think that's the thing, but it's a hard argument, right? It's a hard argument to say, hey, hang in there, because over the lifetime, you are going to see successes that maybe your colleagues who were in a much more narrow field and came out and immediately were, yes, they did very well, but actually they plateau.
Yeah, Tony Reeve notes that the term for adding in STEM to STEM in the arts has become STEAM more recently.
Yeah.
I remember about 10 years ago when I was working for the University of North Carolina system, there was an argument about everybody needs to be a technology major. Everyone needs to be involved in a technical field. And we did just kind of casually a review of the undergraduate majors of the members of the Board of Governors, who, you know, by definition are wildly successful people. And what we found is that I think at the time it was maybe 4 out of 32 had grown up to do something in the field that they majored in as an undergraduate. And, you know, instead they'd use that critical thinking skills to be wildly successful in a variety of fields. And you hear that more and more from even technology companies saying, you know what, the early edge goes to those that have exclusively technical skills, but the people who maybe get promoted more over time are those that have those broad, what IBM calls T-shaped skills, you know, broad right. across a number of areas, maybe deep in one. A question earlier from Greg Hedgepeth about how you are thinking about this moment of racial equity and how your school students are thinking about it. What's going on at Bennett that is kind of the modern analog to what happened in the 60s with the sit-in movement? How are your students thinking about the issues raised over the summer and really that have been going on for a long time, but maybe are more in public view than they have been?
Well, and I also see in his comment that he's asking about, you know, some of the Black community conflicts with the police. We have a number of our students are very, very interested in that topic. Because they're all remote, they're in their own communities and they're staying active in terms of those areas. But what I want to talk a little bit about is not only kind of where we are today, which is our students are still continuing to be the behind the scenes activists, or there are videos from the summer of our students giving speeches on the front of you know, political buildings around the country, government buildings around the country. So we're still doing all of that. But what I've been talking about is that really the future of social justice and civil rights, I really see in a couple of domains in particular. Number one, in the world of health, and then the second is in the world of technology, and sometimes there's an intersection between those two. And by that, specifically, I'm looking at Black women. So at best, Black women, whether it's in the area of health or technology, are ignored, and at worst, Black women are preyed upon in those areas. And so what does that look like for a liberal arts institution? What does that look like in social justice? Well, we need to have more people of color, more Black women involved in those areas so that we're not seeing the kinds of racial and gender bias that we're seeing in technology as it develops, or in the healthcare area as it develops. Though it doesn't mean we need to produce more nurses at Bennett College, or that we need to produce computer scientists. What we need to do is say, those of you who are studying philosophy, who are studying ethics, who are studying writing in our journalism program, you need to be involved in those professions at the forefront to help shape the new technology, to help shape the new healthcare. When we look at public health and the things we're struggling with in our conversations about comorbidities related to race and gender, we didn't have the people involved in those conversations early on who could help inform that. And so, I think it's really important for us to also think about social justice and civil rights can be a part of any conversation. When the app Clubhouse, when Clubhouse first started in the fall, or at least when I first joined in the fall, there was a really great conversation that took place that was about social justice careers. And what I really appreciated, they were all very young people. I was definitely older by 20, 30 years. And they were saying, if you become a teacher, that is a form of social justice. That is a social justice and civil rights related job. That really helped reframe my own thinking. And so when I think about this question, I think about it as, in what ways can you get involved from the beginning to influence policy? You heard us having this discussion about the skinny budget, that Biden put out. You have to know about policy if you care about social justice and civil rights. So how are you getting involved in policy, or how are you getting, if you're a poli-sci major, or maybe if you're an English major, or communications major, how are you getting involved in those topics from the beginning? So I think we're trying to think holistically, but also really saying there are two areas that are challenged: healthcare and health and technology, where we think we have something to contribute.
All right. President Suzanne Walsh, thank you. We could go on another hour, but we're trying to respect people's time, and especially your time. So thank you for that. Thank you for being with us. We were joined earlier by Dr. Paulette Dillard, the president of Shaw University. And thanks to all of you for being with us and staying a little bit over. First and Future is produced by James Herrick. Leadership on this series comes from Communications Director Greg Hedgepeth. Kirsten Chang was really helping to move the chat along and telling people about the show. We had research assistance this week from Simone Coleman. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Next week, on April 27th, we'll be joined by Dr. Carrie Dixon and Dr. Kuldeep Rawat of Elizabeth City State University. That'll be the third in our series. We hope that you will join us for that, April 27th at 9 a.m. For all of us at NC State's Institute for Emerging Issues, thank you for joining us. I'm Leslie Boney. See you in the future.